Let us begin by challenging a very common assumption. Many people believe that alcohol is a relatively recent human invention born from the dawn of farming. We tend to view it as a byproduct of settled society, a luxury that appeared only after we mastered the soil. However, modern science reveals a completely different story. The desire to consume alcohol predates civilization, and it likely predates humanity itself. What seems like a questionable modern social habit is actually connected to a deep biological attraction. This attraction evolved millions of years ago, long before the first brick was laid or the first seed was planted. It is a biological whisper from our deepest past, guiding our choices from behind the scenes. To understand where this began, we have to travel back in time approximately 10 million years. In the lush, tropical forests of Africa, our early primate ancestors were faced with a constant, daily struggle. They needed to find enough calories to survive in a highly competitive environment. It was during this era that these primates began spending more time on the forest floor. There, they encountered naturally fermented fruit which had fallen from the high canopy. As tiny yeast cells landed on the ripe fruit, they converted the natural sugars into ethanol. This process created a mild intoxicating effect, but more importantly, it produced a very strong scent. According to the groundbreaking theory by evolutionary biologist Robert Dudley, this scent changed everything. He calls this the Drunken Monkey Hypothesis. Dudley argues that primates who could detect the smell of ethanol gained a massive advantage. The scent acted as a natural beacon, guiding them directly to the most energy-dense food available. A fruit that was fermenting was a fruit that was rich in easily digestible sugars. Over countless generations, this sensory connection grew much stronger. The primates who could smell and digest this fermented fruit survived more often and passed on their genes. What started as a simple trick for finding food slowly became embedded in our ancestors' biology. By the time the very first modern humans walked the earth, the inclination toward fermented substances was already present. It was not a learned behavior but a genetic inheritance written into our DNA. We were quite literally born to be attracted to the smell of fermentation. Therefore, the real mystery of history is not why we enjoy these beverages. The true puzzle is when we decided to stop searching for fermented fruits and started intentionally creating them. It is the transition from passive gatherers to active, deliberate creators. For a long time, historians believed this transition occurred during the birth of agriculture. However, a stunning discovery in a place called Raqefet Cave, located in modern-day Israel, shattered this timeline. Archaeologists discovered that a semi-nomadic group of people known as the Natufians were active long before farms existed. Around 13,000 years ago, these ancient hunter-gatherers were using the cave for spiritual ceremonies and burials. Inside the cave, researchers led by Professor Li Liu analyzed deep stone mortars carved directly into the bedrock. They were not expecting to find traces of alcohol, but the results were undeniable. Inside those ancient stone vessels, they found microscopic starch residues and plant particles. These particles showed clear signs of germination and deliberate fermentation typical of brewing. This proved beyond a doubt that people were producing beer-like beverages thousands of years before the first farm was ever established. This discovery completely overturned the traditional sequence of human development. For decades, the standard textbook narrative claimed that humans settled down, grew grain for bread, and eventually noticed some leftover dough fermenting. Only then, supposedly, did we discover the joy of beer. But the Raqefet Cave evidence shows the exact opposite was happening. These ancient hunter-gatherers were willing to gather wild grains, which was an incredibly tedious task, just to ferment them. They invested immense time and physical energy into brewing despite not having permanent homes or crops. Clearly, this fermented liquid was not a casual byproduct of an easy life. It was a highly valued creation, important enough to justify intense physical labor. It suggests that our desire for a social drink was a primary driver, not a secondary reward. To see how this desire shaped physical monuments, we must travel to another extraordinary site. In present-day Turkey lies Göbekli Tepe, a place often described as the world's oldest temple. Built more than 11,000 years ago, it consists of massive, T-shaped stone pillars carved with intricate animal designs. For decades, archaeologists struggled to understand how and why this place was built. The people who erected these massive monuments were hunter-gatherers living without agriculture or permanent settlements. How did nomadic bands coordinate such an enormous communal effort without any central government? It would require hundreds of people to work together for months or even years at a time. In a world where survival was a daily struggle, motivating people to leave their families and carve giant stones seemed almost impossible. There had to be a very powerful incentive to bring them all together. The answer to this mystery became clearer when researchers examined the site more closely. Scattered among the ruins, they discovered large limestone troughs capable of holding up to 160 liters of liquid. Chemical analyses of these vessels revealed traces of calcium oxalate, which is a key indicator of grain fermentation. It appears that Göbekli Tepe was not just a quiet place of worship. It was a massive ceremonial gathering spot where people traveled long distances to celebrate and feast. And at the heart of these feasts was a steady supply of freshly brewed beer. In this context, alcohol served as a powerful social glue. It broke down social barriers, encouraged cooperation, and helped unite disparate groups of people. The promise of a grand celebration, complete with food and drink, was likely the ultimate incentive that made the construction of the world's oldest temple possible. This brings us to a highly provocative and fascinating theory proposed by archaeologist Patrick McGovern. He suggests that we may have started farming not because we were hungry but because we were thirsty. The desire for a reliable and constant supply of ingredients for brewing may have driven the agricultural revolution. Think about it, wild grains are difficult to gather and yield very little food when eaten raw. However, when you ferment those grains, they become much easier to digest and keep for much longer. The urge to secure a steady supply of grain for the next big tribal feast may have forced us to settle down. If this theory is true, then beer is not a consequence of civilization. Instead, beer is the active catalyst that forced us to develop agriculture, build permanent villages, and ultimately write down history. We did not start farming to make bread, we did it to ensure the cups never ran empty. As the millennia passed, human brewing techniques became increasingly sophisticated. By the year 7000 before Common Era, humans were no longer just fermenting whatever wild grains they could find. At a Neolithic site called Jiahu in northern China, archaeologists made a remarkable discovery inside ancient clay jars. Chemical analysis of the residues showed a highly complex and deliberate beverage. The ancient villagers had combined rice, honey, grapes, and hawthorn fruit to create a unique blend. This was not a random accident of nature but a carefully crafted recipe. The people of Jiahu were actively experimenting with flavors and fermentation processes. This drink, which researchers sometimes refer to as Jiahu mead, was a cross between beer, wine, and mead. It shows that even 9,000 years ago, humans possessed a deep, intuitive understanding of how to manipulate nature for a perfect drink. Thousands of years later, this ancient craft became the literal engine of one of history's greatest empires. In ancient Egypt, beer was far more than a recreational beverage for the elite. It was a fundamental pillar of daily survival and the national economy. When the massive pyramids of Giza were being built, the thousands of laborers were not paid in gold. Instead, they received daily rations of beer as their primary compensation. Typically, a worker would receive 4 to 5 liters of beer every single day. This beer was not like the clear, carbonated lagers we see today. It was a thick, nutritious, gruel-like liquid that was low in alcohol but highly sustaining. It was the fuel that built the ancient world, keeping the labor force healthy and motivated. To understand why beer was so essential to the Egyptians, we have to look at the harsh realities of ancient life. Untreated water from the Nile River was often contaminated and highly dangerous to drink. The fermentation process, however, naturally killed off harmful pathogens. This made beer a much safer source of hydration than water for large, concentrated populations. Additionally, the thick brew was packed with essential calories, B vitamins, and amino acids that were vital for intense physical labor. In many ways, ancient beer functioned simultaneously as both liquid bread and clean water. It was a highly practical solution to the problems of sanitation and nutrition in a pre-industrial society. Without it, sustaining the massive workforce required for empire building would have been nearly impossible. Beyond its role as a daily food source, alcohol also held a deeply sacred and respected place in Egyptian culture. They believed that beer was a divine gift from the gods, specifically associated with Hathor, the goddess of joy and fertility. It was heavily integrated into religious festivals and temple rituals. Furthermore, the ancient Egyptians viewed beer as a powerful medicine. Medical papyri show that beer was used as a base for hundreds of remedies, helping to dissolve herbs and ease pain. It was a multi-purpose tool that addressed physical, spiritual, and social needs all at once. From the cradle to the grave, beer was woven into the very fabric of life. It protected their health, paid their wages, and connected them to their gods. It is hard to find another single substance that carried such immense cultural weight. When we look across these thousands of years of history, a very clear and beautiful pattern begins to emerge. From our primate ancestors searching for fermenting fruit to the Natufians brewing in dark caves, the story of alcohol is the story of human progress. It is a thread that connects the builders of Göbekli Tepe to the scientists in modern research labs. Alcohol was there at the very beginning, acting as a catalyst for community, cooperation, and technological innovation. It evolved from a natural, evolutionary curiosity into a powerful cultural force. Every major leap in human history, from the development of farming to the creation of complex pottery and writing, seems to have occurred with a cup in hand. It is a shared heritage that transcends borders, languages, and eras. This journey through time leads us to a fascinating conclusion. It is highly possible that alcohol shaped human civilization far more than civilization shaped alcohol. Every time we raise a glass today, we are unconsciously connecting to an ancient evolutionary journey. We are repeating the exact same impulse that drove our distant ancestors to reach for fermented fruit millions of years ago. The methods we use have certainly changed and our technology has become infinitely more advanced, but the underlying instinct remains remarkably the same. Please keep in mind that these perspectives are interpretations of historical and scientific data offered to give you a fresh, engaging way to look at human history rather than formal guidance. Perhaps the greatest lesson we can draw from this is a new perspective on our own behavior. Our attraction to these substances is not a moral failure or a modern glitch, but a deeply rooted biological legacy that helped our ancestors survive. However, in our modern world where alcohol is cheap and abundant, we must remember that our bodies still process it, using that same ancient biology. Understanding this connection can help us find a healthy balance, respecting the history without falling victim to modern excess. If you found this exploration of our ancient past eye-opening, please consider subscribing to the channel. We have many more journeys into the hidden histories of daily life waiting for you. Before you go, I would love to hear your thoughts. Do you think civilization would have ever started without our ancient thirst? Let me know in the comments below, and thank you for listening.